Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and I think there are probably a lot of you that are excited that we're moving past week 3 and starting to head into week 4. Another weird week in the NFL, and it's happening every week so far to start the season. I'm doing some research on the back end right now to see if we've had any other years recently where there's been kind of this weird start where a lot of the studs that we drafted in the early rounds are just not performing well right now. So, and I think there's either a lot of people that are 3-0 or a whole lot of people that are 0-3, but whatever it may be, there's still a lot of season left. Let's continue to try and make the best decisions possible with the knowledge that we're given, and just understand that sometimes weird things happen. Now, one other thing I want to note in this video is that I am begging and pleading all of you to watch and listen and not just look at the graphics. We're getting a lot of responses right now on these videos, and I can absolutely tell every time someone comments when they have and have not watched the video. So make sure you check out this video, understand what we're talking about with our start and sits and why we might be leaning one way or another, and then make sure that you tune back in later in the week for our rankings episode where we will update you on injured players and other information that we may get throughout the week. But it's time to hop into it. First matchup of the week is going to be Thursday Night Football, Miami and Cincinnati. This is going to be a good one. Now, Gesicki for me is a little too iffy, even in this matchup. If I had to start him this week, I wouldn't be feeling great about it, but I am going to list him as a start Still, Cincinnati has allowed the 4th most yards to tight ends, but no touchdowns as of yet. And I'm kind of waiting to see what happens with Tua. As of right now, people are saying it wasn't concussion, it was a back injury. How did he get back on the field so quickly? Did he have a concussion? A whole lot of questions surrounding all of that. So we'll continue to kind of see what happens and update ourselves and keep that information in mind as we go through that. But again, with Gesicki here, really we got to hope for a touchdown. If he doesn't get a touchdown, we're probably not going to get anything that we would need to actually start him. But because of the potential yards and the potential matchups on the outside, I'm going to have him as a very high-risk start this week. As far as Hayden Hurst goes, the volume continues to be there. And honestly, it's been a nice surprise with the volume. He's tied 12th among tight ends in targets right now, but the big plays and the production just aren't there. And that's because they're so talented at wide receiver. He's a risky start for me. But if they were to be missing like a Joe Mixon this week, and maybe they don't run the ball as much as we would hope, especially in a matchup against Miami where they could be down, Hayden Hurst could see some nice production, and hopefully that volume will push that this week. Minnesota at New Orleans, and Irv Smith Jr., he's very close for me. He's very close. This is a tough matchup, though, going up against New Orleans, and he has been very inconsistent as a pass catcher. There's been a few plays this year where it's like, man, if he would have just held on to the ball, or if he would have continued his route or whatever, we would have probably put ourselves in a much better situation for some fantasy weeks. But unfortunately, we just haven't seen that yet. There have been some inconsistencies. So for now, I'm still kind of holding. I'm holding until we see that consistency factor peek its head, so then we know when we start Irv Smith Jr., what are we going to be getting each week with it. It's going to be a tough matchup for Justin Jefferson again. It could lead to more targets for Smith, but I think I'm going to go elsewhere and look for a little bit more potential upside this week. And Taysom Hill for me, him and Juwan Johnson, they're both going to be sits for me. Johnson is seeing a decent amount of volume come his way, but this is, it's an okay matchup for him. I don't know if I'm really trusting it right now when we've got the potential for Landry and Michael Thomas to be back. Now, if Landry and Michael Thomas end up being hurt and they don't end up playing this week or limited in some capacity, we're going to talk about that more on the rankings video. So as of right now, they are a sit, but we'll see what happens later on in the week with potential injuries, updates, and that type of news. And one other thing to mention on Hill real quick, here's the issue with Taysom Hill. He is way too dependent on trick plays and weird schemes and these type of things that we need to do to put him in a position to win. He's not just your normal football player where it's like, yeah, he's plug and play because he does these things so well. He's way too dependent on schemes to be in his favor for him to be fantasy productive. So for me, he's an emergency option. If he scores a couple touchdowns in a week, like in week 1, that's great. But unless he gets utilized a little bit more consistently in the game plan, I'm going to be off of it for right now. Cleveland and Atlanta could bring a really good tight end matchup this week. For both teams, this is going to be a pretty decent matchup. For Cleveland, it's going to be a pretty decent matchup. Atlanta can end up being a little bit more difficult, but because Kyle Pitts isn't your true tight end, it might not matter nearly as much. But for David Njoku, he is going to be a start for me this week. Atlanta allows the second most fantasy points to tight ends right now, the fourth most receptions, and the fifth most receiving yards, which is going to lead me to Prize Picks prop of the week for David Njoku. I'm going to go over 34.5 receiving yards up against Atlanta this week. That's a pretty low number based on the week he's coming off of. Hopefully he doesn't disappear from the game plan this week. They need to keep utilizing that type of weapon. And for Kyle Pitts, like I mentioned, this is a tougher matchup for him. Cleveland has done a pretty decent job of limiting some good tight ends so far this year. Tyler Conklin, Pat Freiermuth, a couple of them to kind of kick things off this season. But since Pitts isn't, used in the conventional sense, I'm not really going to hold that against him too much. So we're going to go back to him being a start. It still is a little bit risky for us, though. We saw so much good in the first quarter, and then he disappeared for 3 more quarters. So he's had really 1 good quarter all season long. We need to see 4 straight this weekend. Buffalo at Baltimore. And Buffalo for Dawson Knox, he's kind of disappeared this week, which isn't really shocking given the wide receivers, and wouldn't shock you if you purchased our draft guide, because we talked about him and why he was a potential bust this season given what they have done at the position. Dawson Knox didn't really start to break out last year until Cole Beasley was missing games. He really soaked up a lot of those targets and a lot of those end zone looks that you would normally see. Now, to top that all off, he was also in a position where he didn't see a ton of volume in production last year. It was all based on the touchdowns. They brought in Jamison Crowder, and you knew that Isaiah McKenzie was going to take a step forward, as well as Gabe Davis on the outside becoming a much bigger game plan. Because of all of those things, Dawson Knox has kind of fell to the wayside a little bit. This is going to be a matchup that could end up being decent for him, but I'm not going to start him this week given what we have seen so far this year. For Baltimore, this is a really bad matchup for Mark Andrews, but it is Mark Andrews. You do not sit him. It always kind of drives me nuts when people are like, should I start so this week? And I'm like, they're number 1 or 2 or 3 at their position. Yes, we start those guys regardless of matchup. Washington and Dallas this week for Logan Thomas. He's going to go back to being a sit for me. Dallas has only allowed 76 receiving yards to tight end so far this season. Now, maybe no one that, you're getting super excited for, in those matchups, but Thomas is still risky every single week given the amount of weapons that they have there with Dotson, with Samuel, and also with Terry McLaurin. Now, if one of those guys were to become injured and miss some time, we are in a position where there's a much better opportunity for them. And we'll keep that in mind if that happens. But right now, it hasn't happened. 4, Dalton Schultz. He was inactive this past week, and due to that, it really dropped his production and volume scores down. Now, if we find out later in the week that he is healthy, and we can bump up his injury score here, it's going to push him to being a start this week. So keep an eye again on the rankings video so we can talk more about whether or not Schultz makes it to game day. Seattle is like Oprah for tight ends. You get a target, you get a target, you get a snap, you get a snap. Every tight end in the world gets snaps. It doesn't work for fantasy purposes, though. But it also tells you about the fantasy position of tight end when Will Dissly catches a touchdown and all of a sudden jumps up to being a top 12 tight end this week. Unfortunately, those aren't things that we can risk. So we're not going to be starting any of them this week because they do play 3 tight ends and they give them completely different rotations and there's no telling who is going to get what or when. So for me, no thank you to Seattle. Now for Detroit, I mentioned it last week with TJ Hockenson. We went back to him being a start again because of how many targets he was getting. It happened. He found the end zone, which was the thing that we were missing and we talked about. With TJ Hockenson this week, we're 100% needing to go with Hockenson because it is a good matchup for him. Amon-Ra St. Brown, even though all the tests look to be good right now, he's still banged up with that ankle. It potentially limits him this coming week. The touchdown last week helped his production, but the volume had not disappeared for Hockenson. He is still 9th in targets right now among tight ends. The LA Chargers and the Houston Texans, nothing about the Los Angeles Chargers was good last week. Nothing was even okay last week except a touchdown on one target to Michael Thomas in the end zone. Well, that happens, right? It happens from time to time. When you've got Keenan Allen beat up, when you've got your quarterback, Justin Herbert, beat up, it was a matchup in which Los Angeles just looked completely overwhelmed with the entire situation, which is crazy to look at. But with Gerald Everett, yeah, no one produced last week, but we're going to go back to him this week. Again, Allen is still beat up. We don't know about him. We don't know about Herbert. It makes Everett even more important to this offense, knowing that we might have some opportunity where Herbert's just going to have to play some dink and dunk. We're going to have to get rid of the football. And heck, he might not even play this week after the disaster that was last week. They might just say, hey, we're going to wait until he's feeling better before we keep running him out there, which could make Everett even more of a reliability. Now, for Brown, Jordan, and Howard, and now even Jordan Akins for Houston, they're all getting involved. If anything, they're even worse than Seattle at this point, except for the fact that Seattle is actually throwing, touchdowns to their tight ends. OJ Howard disappeared after the first week. He caught 2 touchdowns. We haven't seen him since. I was hoping over the next couple of weeks we would continue to see that grow. It hasn't, so we're off of all of them. Tennessee at Indianapolis. Austin Hooper, listen, even with Robert Woods coming off a knee injury, even with Treylon Burks being beat up this offseason, even with Derrick Henry not getting off to a great start, Austin Hooper still hasn't done anything. There's nothing to see here. Even if he were to score 3 touchdowns this week, we're not starting him next week. So we're not even considering putting him in the game. And then as far as Indianapolis goes, one thing I want us to make note of is rookie Jelani Woods. This is someone that we need to watch now. The big rookie, 2 touchdowns last week. The Colts don't really have anyone reliable outside of Michael Pittman. Can Jelani Woods make that jump? Can he become that guy for Matt Ryan, especially in the red zone where he becomes a go-to guy? If he does, and I think there is a possibility we could see him shoot up the production and the volume categories here and become a guy that we take a shot on every week. Chicago and the New York Giants, and this might be one of the worst matchups of the week. Listen, Chicago's only throwing the ball about 15 times per game right now. The New York Giants are throwing the ball more, but they have Danny Pennies out there trying to do it, and really no weapons to utilize. Cole Kmet, Daniel Bellinger, Cole Kmet, we can't do anything until we see this offense start to throw more. When that happens, maybe we go back to Kmet. But for right now, we're off of him. As far as Daniel Bellinger goes, he could be on the up and up. We've lost Sterling Shepard now for the Giants. Maybe that starts to gain a little bit more clarity for the wide receiver position. If they continue to underperform, maybe Bellinger is a guy that we have to watch out for later in the year. So keep an eye on him. Not 100% going to be playing him or even picking him up off the waiver wire right now, but we're going to need to be ready to move if we see that opportunity getting better. Jacksonville and Philadelphia could end up being one of the more interesting tight end matchups of the week. Now, I brought this up in the Start Sit video last week with Evan Ingram. He's going to be a guy that's going to have a good game, and then he's going to disappear for 3 straight games. And that's what happened. Only 3 targets last week. But I'm kind of liking this matchup against Philadelphia. It's not that tough of a matchup for tight ends. We know that the matchups on the outside are going to be a little bit tougher for wide receivers. We know that this is a defensive line that likes to get to the quarterback, and they're going to be trying to get to Trevor Lawrence this week and make him kind of, get a little befuddled in the backfield and try to get him wound up a little bit. Trevor Lawrence, if he stays cool and collective, I think he's going to find Evan Ingram a few times this week, and that could be good for fantasy owners. For Dallas Goedert, the ceiling isn't quite what we thought it would be with him during the season, but hey, he keeps scoring and he keeps seeing volumes. And when you do that as a tight end, you definitely need to be in our lineup. Even with tougher matchups, maybe we bring that ceiling down a little bit. The upside's limited. We're still rolling him out this week. The New York Jets and the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Head over to manscaped.com. Use code word headliners when you check out, and you're going to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping with manscaped.com. Now, we've got 2 really good options so far this season at tight end in this matchup. And not only that, but they bring a pretty decent matchup for each of them as well. Conklin's probably the biggest surprise of all the tight end position right now. He's seeing production and he is seeing volume. He's a start this week. But one of the reasons this is my Manscaped must-watch matchup is because Zach Wilson will likely be back this week. And if that happens, I want to see, does that change Tyler Conklin's production at all? It was Joe Flacco throwing him the football. Does Zach Wilson go a different route? That's going to be very interesting for us to see in this matchup, and that's one of the reasons why this is one of my matchups to watch this week. For Pat Freiermuth, I mean, he's 6th in targets right now among tight ends. Now, the ceiling continues to be lower because they suck at the quarterback position. Not going to name any names. Mitchy Biscuits. Matchup is okay, but if he doesn't score, he's not going to be a hit. So if we're running him out there, just be prepared that we're rooting for the touchdown. And if he doesn't get that, it's probably going to be a long night. Arizona and Carolina, and someone literally just asked me on the waiver wire video if they should drop Zach Ertz for David Njoku. Listen, I like David Njoku. Zach Ertz is the tight end 2 on the ceiling or on the season. Do we not know that? Do people not recognize that? Because he is. And it shouldn't be a surprise because we told you all offseason long he could get off to a really hot start. But I'm not off Zach Ertz until DeAndre Hopkins comes back. And even when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, we still got to keep an eye on Ertz because he could end up being just fine. This is a tougher matchup going up against a Carolina team that has limited, some tight ends so far this season. But we know that they can be very tough on the outside. So when that happens, now we have to look to Zach Ertz being kind of a safety blanket over the middle, and that's where I see his volume this week. I don't know if it's going to be a huge game, but I think it's going to be enough to warrant starting him. And as far as Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble go, New England and Green Bay, and I don't even know what New England's doing, to be honest with you. I mean, they haven't utilized Smith or Henry at all this season. They signed both of them to pretty big deals last offseason. Mac Jones is now hurt. I'm not even in on either of these guys until I see some huge improvements in the game plan, but I don't know if that's coming at this point. Big Bob Tonyan, he's going to find himself as a start this week. This is a pretty good matchup. Tight ends have fared well against against New England so far this season. I'm still going to give him a start because last week we kind of saw that step forward. 7 targets, caught 6 of them. That is what we need to see from Robert Tonyan. Not a guy with a whole lot of upside because of how much they spread the ball around, but as long as he continues to be one of the guys getting the most targets, we're going to be right around 10 fantasy points a week with him. Denver and Las Vegas. I wish Albert Are You Okay was a thing. I mean, I want to keep using the nickname number 1, but he is a guy that is a good tight end. He is an athletic monster, and he's a guy that if he were to get the volume, I think he would end up being just fine. But the problem is nobody's doing well in Denver right now, and I want you all to keep in mind that Russell Wilson didn't play at all in the preseason. So these first 3 games of the year were essentially his preseason. I expect things to get a little bit better as we start heading in a little bit further into the season. Maybe they don't have quite the ceiling that we would have hoped for in year 1, but I think they will get it together and be fantasy viable at some point. Now, will Albert Are You Okay be one of those? I don't know about that, but keep an eye on it. For Darren Waller, Denver has allowed the 7th most points to tight ends and the 7th most receptions. So yes, knowing that, at this point in time, as of this recording, Hunter Renfrow was still not out of the concussion protocol. We'll be going back to Waller this week, even though last week wasn't great. Kansas City at Tampa Bay is actually going to bring a surprise for you. A second Prize Picks must-watch prop of the week. Travis Kelce, I'm going to go with the over of 70.5 receiving yards. Tampa Bay so far this season is allowing 55 yards per game to tight ends, and that includes Dalton Schultz, Juwan Johnson, and Robert Tonyan. No one to really write home about. It's not like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce had huge games against Tampa Bay. These guys have had games against Tampa Bay. So do we think that Travis Kelce can get 70.5 receiving yards? Yes, we do. I'm taking the over on that. As far as Cameron Brate and Kyle Rudolph go, I mean, Brate was he was a thing at one point in his lifetime. He is not anymore. And this is going to bring us to Monday Night Football, a really good potential matchup, the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. Tyler Higbee, he has a tough matchup, but he is number 2 on the team right now. In terms of targets, he is the guy that Stafford is looking to after Cooper Kupp. He is a safe option. Yes, there's always going to be some risks with really any tight end that you start outside of 2 or 3. But with Tyler Higbee, he is proving to be one of the safer options right now because he is number 2 on his team in targets. This is a tougher matchup, so don't expect a ton of ceiling, but hopefully if he can get 7 to 8 targets and catch a majority of those, he'll be right around 80 receiving yards, and if he scores, even better. For George Kittle, I really want to start George Kittle, and you know what? If I own him, I'm probably starting him again anyway. This is a tougher matchup. I'm going to check my expectations at the door, but I am putting in my lineup again because I just don't give a... There you have it, Headliner Nation. Appreciate everybody tuning in to this week's tight end start and sit video. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Don't miss out on any of the content this season. I know it's been a rough start to the season, people, and everybody that plays fantasy football is experiencing it right now. If you're playing fantasy football and you're saying to yourself, this is awful, you're not the only one. This is a tough start for everybody, all right? So stick with it, and hopefully a lot of these guys get it going very soon, and we all turn our seasons around. But ladies and gentlemen, I am going to go ahead and get out of here. Stay safe and stay healthy the rest of the week, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.